Hello, good morning everybody. Thanks for attending today's webinar. We'll get started here in just a moment. Give everybody another 30 seconds here to trickle in, but we do want to get a nice prompt start time for everybody. We do want to just to get everybody started here, we'll just go through a quick series of housekeeping questions or points rather. So for this one, this is our how to drive compliance in your Type 86 program. So my name is Marcus Eman, and if you don't know me yet or haven't worked with me, I'm a senior global trade customs manager here at Flexport. I've been at Flexport for almost 6 years now, and I'm happy to work on customs and compliance questions, both on this Type 86 as well as any other topics as well. But today we are focusing on going over the Type 86 compliance. Before we begin, let's go through a couple of the housekeeping steps. So first of all, on your screen, you'll see a sidebar to the right-hand side of the main stage. If you at any time you need assistance during the live webinar, please message us in the help chat located on the sidebar. You can also ask questions via the Q&A tab on the sidebar. Tom and I hope that this is an interactive session here, and time permitting at the end of the presentation, we'd like to answer audience questions. So be sure to get your question in early so that we can make sure they're prioritized. We also would like to drop a link to the slide deck in the chat at the end of the presentation. So if you find our slides interesting and fascinating and you want to keep them to reference later, look for that link toward the end of our presentation. We can advance to the next slide, Carol. So this is just a quick legal note here. Please keep in mind that all this information provided in this session is based on the situation at the current time and may not be customized to your specific business requirements. We always recommend reaching out to a Flexport expert to discuss your particular situation. We can go to the next slide. Bring Tom up on stage here. Tom, good colleague of mine, industry long timer, and our current vice president of global customs and trade here at Flexport. Welcome, Tom. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Marcus.
We can go to the next slide here, and we'll go through the agenda. We'll kick things off by just covering kind of what is de minimis. There's a lot of terminology here. We'll just kind of clarify, okay, what's 321, what's de minimis. We'll talk about what is our recent history, some of the things that may have been happening this year, you may have seen in the news, some of the changes that are happening right now. Talk about, but really the focus of this is how to maximize your de minimis compliance and time of entry advice. And we'll talk about a little bit maybe pointing toward the future and some Q&A questions that you all, I hope, are adding right now on the sidebar to the right. But we do want to also start with a poll question that's also available to you. So we want to review a few of that. So if you look over on the sidebar on the right to submit your votes, our first question is just pretty simple. Is your company currently using or considering using Type 86 to import low-value shipments? A, yes, we currently use it. B, we're considering it. C, we used to use it, but we no longer do. And D, no, we don't use it. Let's just take a look here at the results coming in. I think we want to find out how we can serve clients, and also are kind of interested about where the rest of the industry is at here. So I see for this first question, we have a bit of a split here, almost three ways between yes, we currently use it, yes, we're considering it, and then no, we don't. But a few of them looks like they may have shied away from it. We used to, but we're not currently using it. So kind of some interesting results there. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I really think it's interesting that a third of the people that are participating in the webinar today are using it. A third of them are not. A third of them, it's almost like even split among everybody. So that's great. That means we've got a good broad spectrum of people to listen today.
Yeah.
Let's see. The next poll question. Are we ready to jump to the next poll question? Great. This is for the people that are not using the Type 86 program or the de minimis import currently. So the question, let's see, what's the main reason? And I'm surprised. It's interesting that nobody said that it doesn't fit their business model, but the vast majority, over 75% of the respondents so far, are saying that the reason that they're not using it is because they're really unsure of the requirements, or they're uneducated on the process. So hopefully that's a good sign, a good reason for us to have this webinar today. Hopefully we'll be able to educate you so that you can make a better and more informed decision.
Yeah, I think so, right? Because people look at de minimis as a great opportunity. Duty-free treatment? Are you kidding me? Who wouldn't want that, right? Without all the complexity of trying to qualify for a free trade agreement, right? This is a great thing here. But I think right away we kind of know that there's just a lot of uncertainty about it here. So maybe a great place to start is to talk about maybe some of the terminology that kind of goes on here, Tom. So we hear
Yep.
de minimis, I hear type 86, 321, manifest clearance. They're all similar, but not all the same. Could you maybe break it down for us a little bit?
Sure. So the concept that I think is important to understand in this webinar, we're going to be touching on a lot of things. We're going to focus primarily on Type 86, but we're going to talk about all of the different ways that de minimis shipments are imported. So the first thing to understand, I would say, is the terminology de minimis. De minimis is kind of the broad phrase that's used by customs to describe all of the different ways that companies are able to import um, low value, under $800 per person per day shipments duty free with minimal clearance. So that's de minimis. That's the overall provision. The way that the current law and the regulations state is that these shipments can be cleared off of the manifest. And so what you'll see there are different types of manifest clearances. And those of you that have been involved in international trade and customs here in the US know that there are different types of manifests. So basically, depending on the different mode of transportation, there's the air manifest, there's the ocean manifest. And with the air and ocean manifest, those were not designed around the Type 86 or the de minimis shipment. So they don't have an easy way for customs to manage them. With the truck manifest for the truck modes of shipments, there is a somewhat automated way so that companies that do import de minimis shipments via truck are able to use a manifest clearance and have CBP release those rather easily and automatically. And so because of a number of different issues, one of them the manifest issue, but the other one, and that is that we all know that we don't have to just clear through customs when we're importing products. Many products that are imported are subject to other government agency requirements or PGA requirements. For example, Food and Drug Administration, Environmental Protection Agency, and so forth. And so because of that, customs came up with this new entry type called entry type 86 that allows us as a broker to file your de minimis shipment, have it released automatically by customs, and attach to it data required to get clearance through the other partner government agencies out there. And so that's the Type 86 entry that we're going to be talking a little bit more about today. And then the final topic that I wanted to touch on was another pilot that Customs came out with called the Section 321 Data Pilot. And that was a pilot that allowed a certain limited group of companies to kind of do some experiments with Customs on releasing low value shipments. I did want to also talk a little bit, one more thing about the Type 86 that's important to understand, and that is also a pilot program. It's not yet in the regulations. And being a pilot program means that Customs kind of can quickly stand it up, test things out, make some changes, and if necessary, and potentially create a permanent program out of it or not, depending on the results of the pilot. Marcus, do you want to touch on, on the next slide where we're talking a little bit about
Yeah.
some of the statistics and changes?
Yeah, happy to talk about the Type 86. Obviously, I think the first one is that it's just very popular, right? It may be a pilot program, but in a certain respect, it's maybe customs' most successful pilot program. Certainly, at least when it comes to the amount of parcels coming in. So, there's about $54 billion of these small value parcels in 2023. Close to $65 billion is estimated for 2024, which is just a significant amount. And on the chart on the side of the screen there, you can see that most of this growth of these low value de minimis shipments has really come from this Type 86 space. We're seeing an almost fivefold, potentially as much as high as maybe sixfold increase by the end of this year in terms of the number of individual parcels being cleared through customs. You see the total at the bottom there, but Type 86 is really where this growth area is. There's sometimes a bit of a conception here, like, oh, is this part of the TIFTIA when they moved it from $200 to $800 of value? Well, not so much, right? It only really, the average value of these parcels is only about $50. So for the most part, a lot of these are very small clearances. They are minimis, small clearances that don't have a lot of value as well, but they just add up. One industry estimate in 2022 said from China alone, there may have been $19 billion of duty not collected, just coming from shipments from China under these de minimis programs. So as these program gets larger, it starts to kind of get more eyes and more attention. And no doubt, if you've been listening to trade news or congressional news, you may have heard some chatter about this in the past. But as Tom mentioned, right, this was a pilot program where CBP has a little bit more room to maneuver and make things change quicker. And one of those changes they announced came with a Federal Register notice back in February, a few months ago. The first one, and I think perhaps the most substantive change, was really just the timing for a Type 86 clearance. Before this change in February, you could file Type 86 entries up to 15 days after the actual arrival of the cargo to the entry port. They've now changed that to specifically, quote, upon or prior to arrival of the cargo to the entry port as indicated in AMS. That really shortens the timeline. But CBP did it because they were worried about all these parcels distributing out, going into parcel networks, getting on, parcel carrier trucks before they really had a chance to review data. So maybe, it arrives on day 5, it goes to all your warehouses, and then day 10 is when the entry gets submitted. Oh no, it's probably already too late for customs to take any enforcement. This was, enacted in February, but it was actually went into force in mid-April. They also clarified just 2 kind of key points, more of a bit of a flexing of the muscle, if you will, saying only specified regulations are waived. Formal entries may still be required. So there's only a few things that you don't have to submit on a Type 86. And also clarified that, hey, this is still customs business. Penalties can still happen. They can go to brokers, they can go to importers that aren't following the rules. In April, they also came out with a couple of another announcements here saying that we're going to start enforcing rules about vague cargo descriptions. In theory, this has always been around, right? It's where customs hasn't really appreciated it. They want a more specific description so that they can help do targeting, only really focus their attention on things that they believe are high risk. But now we're actually seeing rejection of entries, which is something new. In fact, we're even seeing some of this on an occasional Type 01, which is like our standard entry filing. There's been a couple of rejections over vague descriptions. And finally, they just reiterated that forced labor enforcement with the power granted to CBP, as well as the mandate from the 2022 UFLPA law, they've really started to focus on textiles and other categories under that UFLPA for Type 86 specifically. Yeah. So, Tom, there's been a lot of changes here recently, right? And if I'm an importer and I'm one of those 76% that were unsure about starting this, right? How do I even go about it? What are the areas that if I'm a trade compliance manager that I'm a little bit cautious of? Maybe what are some of the areas of concern that maybe keep you up at night?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Let's move on to the next slide. So it's important to understand, again, just for me to stress that this is a pilot, and because it's a pilot, customs is really changing the rules on us almost daily in many ways. And so what they're doing is they are looking at the data that we as the broker submit or the carrier submits if it's a manifest clearance, and they're really scrutinizing the data more and more. When the program started recently, it was kind of like wide open. Customs wasn't really clear on how to properly vet the data or screen the data. They weren't looking in a tremendous amount of detail. And so what we're seeing today is we're seeing that Customs is really ramping up enforcement, and they're looking at various data elements that are submitted by us as the broker on the Type 86 entry. And as Marcus mentioned, they're doing the same thing. They're taking their learnings and looking at them on the manifest de minimis clearance shipments and also on the regular clearance shipments. So while we're talking about the Type 86 in the webinar today, this really does apply very broadly. And so the issues that they are looking at are the critical issues to prove that companies or that companies or persons or individuals that are importing products under the Type 86 program are following the rules. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through the key rules that they're looking at, and we'll talk about how we can scrub the data ourselves prior to submitting the Type 86 entry. And it's important to understand that you as the importer or the platform or the company that's making use of the Type 86 program, along with the individual that is the consignee, that is the importer for the purpose of the Type 86 program, along with us as the broker that's filing the Type 86 entry, we each have the same responsibility to to vet our data this way. So the first one, and really a critical one and a fairly simple one to look at on its surface, is the value. Because if you take a look at the de minimis law says that it can be used for up to $800 per person per day. So the key there is the $800. And so the first thing that we have to look at is if somebody bought a product that's say $900 and they tried to ship it on a Type 86 entry, that needs to be blocked, right? It can't go through a Type 86 entry. Well, that's fairly simple. But what happens if that same person imports 2 or more products on the same day, and the total between the two is more than $800? Well, that's where it's incumbent upon the individual importer, the platform or the company that's actually managing the process. They need to have processes and procedures in place to look for this. We as the broker need to have processes and procedures in place to look for this. Now, understanding the way that the Type 86 program works and these de minimis packages ship, generally we get a bulk load of packages that are tendered to us that have a whole bunch of individual shipments in them. So one of the things that we're doing is looking at the value and the names of the people on the shipment, the names of the consignees, the names and address of the consignees. And so if we see 2 shipments where the name and address is the same, and the total value of those 2 or more shipments is more than $800, then we block those shipments because they can't be imported. But what happens if a person imports one product in the morning and another product in the afternoon? Again, we have to scrub the data to look at that. Now, what happens though if a person imports one product, maybe they buy off of one platform, and then on the same day they import another product that they may buy off of another platform where the company that's filing the Type 86 entry is a different company? Well, Customs is already starting to look at that data themselves, and they're working on sending out messages to companies like us saying, there's a shipment that's under $800, but we have another shipment going to the same person, and when you add the 2 of them together, they're more than $800, so they may block us from using the Type 86 entry on a shipment that's under $800 because Customs sees the data on other shipments for other carriers, other brokers, and they may block those.
They're getting much more sophisticated, it sounds like.
Absolutely, they're getting more sophisticated, and we're seeing it. We're actually seeing it in the discussions that are happening, but we're actually seeing that in active shipments as we go further. Okay, the next one, and this is one that Marcus mentioned already, and that's the cargo descriptions. Now, Customs put on their website a list of unacceptable and corresponding acceptable cargo descriptions, manifest descriptions. Now, Customs started doing this for the Type 86, but as Marcus mentioned, they're actually rolling it out to all manifests. They're basically saying that it doesn't matter if it's a Type 86, they don't like these vague descriptions. Now, it's important to also note that that link will take you to a web page that's examples. Now, I was actually in a discussion with one of the executives at Customs that's leading this program yesterday, and he was telling me that they are actually adding to the list, and they're actually working on technology that will look at the words that are on the list and other words that are being added to the list and looking for similar words or different variants of the words. And Customs is not going to be updating the list with every possible selection. That's up to us to do as a broker that's filing these entries. It's up to a carrier to do that's filing manifests to do that. Now, some of the common examples of unacceptable descriptions are broad terms like wearing apparel or samples, or maybe no description but a product number. That's not acceptable. So broad categories of descriptions of product, Customs doesn't like because it doesn't give them the ability to really drill down. Marcus, are there any others that you've seen that are troublesome that we've been having issues with?
Yeah, I think one that we've just generally seen, so far has just been, women's apparel has been a
Yeah.
very common one, right? Or, footwear. Sort of these very, very broad kind of ones that seem to be more troublesome. We've already seen, I think, some more positive results for some of our existing Type 86 importers. If they just make subtle changes where it just goes from saying women's dress to saying polyester woven dress with the name of it. It's called the Stephanie dress or, whatever it happens to be, right? If you start to identify it a little bit easier, that makes customs jobs a little bit easier and also doesn't flag for this kind of vague description. Yeah.
The next one is the PGAs. So the PGA stands for Partner Government Agencies. These are the other government agencies that regulate imports and have requirements for imports. Now, this one's actually fairly easy for us as a broker to screen for in many cases because with the Type 86 entry, there's a requirement to file the 10-digit HTS numbers. So what we're doing is we're looking at those HTS numbers and looking to see if there's a flag for a partner government agency. Now, it's an easy way for us to screen because the data is there, but remember that the HTS number and the flagging is not a definite indication that the product is subject to or not subject to the PGA. So if your products are subject to any of the PGA requirements, it's incumbent upon you to let us know as your broker filing the entry that your products are or are not subject to the PGA. And if your products are classified in a classification that's flagged that it may be subject to a PGA, we need to know whether or not we need to file the PGA data. So, Marcus, can you share with us some of the examples of some of the products that you see that require the PGA that are common products?
Yeah, I think with, the most common ones I think are probably like sunglasses are
Yeah.
typical ones where people may not necessarily understand it. Another one that isn't even allowed under Type 86 is some of your fish and wildlife products. So furs, feathers, shells, those are very common things where all of a sudden you can't even clear them under Type 86. You need to file formal entry with the 3177 to Fish and Wildlife. Make sure you get that Fish and Wildlife release first there. And that's definitely some very, very common stuff. Any sort of the exotic leathers also kind of fall into that bucket. The other one I'd say is also just kind of pest devices, like pesticidal devices or products, bug sprays and, UV lamps or any of those other kinds of things that are maybe fall into EPA or FDA jurisdiction as well. I think those are the ones that usually catch importers maybe a little bit off guard, especially if you're trying to move fast, which a lot of the e-commerce sellers really are trying to move quickly. And I think those are ones where sometimes they get into a bit of trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to understand that not every product can be imported under the Type 86 program. So it's not just the value, but there are other issues. PGA is one of them. Let's move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about some others that also are not allowed to be imported under the Type 86 program. For example, anti-dumping and countervailing duties.
Hmm.
So if the products that are imported are subject to any anti-dumping or countervailing duties, even those products that are subject to dumping where the rate is zero, those are not allowed to be imported under the Type 86 program at all, regardless of the value. So again, this is one of the areas where customs is looking at the data, and because the Type 86 program is a new program, they haven't gotten sophisticated enough to catch all of the different instances of this. But what we're seeing is customs is getting more and more sophisticated day by day. And it's very possible that there was a shipment that you cleared yesterday that cleared without any problem. And when I say yesterday, I mean you could have been clearing the same shipment over the last year. And then all of a sudden, today, customs puts a stop to it. And it's possible that there's something like the anti-dumping or countervailing duties, which are not allowed under the Type 86 program. Um, so what types of products are subject to are subject to anti-dumping and countervailing duties that we see through the Type 86 programs imports that we're doing, and what are we counseling our clients to not import under the Type 86 program? Marcus, can you share some examples?
Yeah, I mean, dumping has really definitely proliferated. I think certainly in the last, call it 6, 7 years. It's always kind of there in the background. And if anybody's done commercial imports, you probably know. I'd hope your broker would be asking questions about this. But I think this also does apply to a fair number of consumer products that are probably more likely to be done in this space. So plastic bags, the retail carrier bags, folding gift boxes, paper clips, lined notebook paper, right? A lot of these things that maybe seem like, oh, this is just basic office supplies, right? But paper clips, pencils, lined notebook paper is a very unholy trinity in terms of importing office supplies. So got to really make sure you watch out for that. I think those are some that maybe sometimes catch people a little off guard because they think, oh, this is consumer products. This isn't really something we have to worry about too much. But it does happen. It does. We do see it quite a bit, and also some of the preserved foods, mushrooms, garlic, honey, those other ones that I know we've seen before and have been around for many years now. Yeah.
Wonderful. When we look at the Type 86 program and we look at some of the priority issues that Customs is working on today, there's kind of a crossover between the two. And Customs is really looking to ensure that individuals and companies are not using the Type 86 program to avoid some of the hot issues in trade compliance today. So things like the forced labor and contraband. We've seen a lot of issues where Customs is looking to crack down on products made with forced labor or products that might contain contraband. Now, Customs has actually given us some tools to help look for these types of products. And so there's some tools that we can use today to screen for potential violations and potential violations specifically. Let's talk first about the forced labor rules. So a few months back, Customs came out and said that they are looking at imports from China a little bit differently than they had in the past. So today, when we import products from China, whether it's a Type 86 entry or a regular consumption entry, we now have to provide Customs with the postal code or the zip code for the manufacturer in China. And if that postal code is a code for a factory in the Xinjiang region of China, that will send back to us as the broker a warning message that says, hey, this is coming from the region within China that's known for forced labor, and that under the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, or UFLPA, or UFLPA, those are prohibited, and those are presumed to be made with forced labor unless the importer can prove otherwise. And so what Customs has done is they've said, if you have a product that's made from a factory that has a postal code in that region, it simply is assumed that it's forced labor. And so we're looking for those and blocking those from being imported as a Type 86 entry. Now, there's actually a second indication that there may potentially be, or there probably is, forced labor in a supply chain, and that's the list of entities. Customs has been adding to the list, and they plan on continuing to add to the list of entities that are known to use forced labor. Now, they may be in China, they may even be in other countries. But again, we've got this listing of companies that Customs is telling us are bad actors, and so we have to screen against those. We have to screen against those companies as well, and not allow those to be imported. Marcus, any other thoughts on the forced labor?
No, I don't think so. I know we have some great resources about this before. We've definitely led kind of some points about this to equip importers with this information. So, we could we could do a whole nother webinar or three on forced labor. So I think I'll just tie a bow on it there. But let's talk about contraband. That's a fun topic. Yeah. What are some
Contraband.
of
So
those ones? Yeah.
yeah, contraband. Now, this is a message that came to Customs from the White House, from President Biden.
Mm.
Basically, we all know that there's a problem with fentanyl and synthetic opioids and other illicit drugs, and Customs is on the front line of looking to prevent these from getting into the country. And so, Customs is not only looking at stopping shipments of fentanyl and other drugs, but they're now looking for precursor chemicals, the chemicals that are used to make the drugs. They're also looking for machinery and equipment that's used to make the product. So, for example, pill presses, these are these devices that are used to make the pills of fentanyl. So, those are things that customs is looking for. And what customs is doing on these is a little bit it's a little bit harder to find because there's not like a flag in the tariff schedule, although there are chemicals that we're looking for. But customs is really saying in these situations is how well do you know your suppliers, but also how well do you know your customers? And how well do you know your customers is actually an interesting one. I was at a conference yesterday with where there was a speaker from customs, and he was talking about this topic. And one of the things that he said that they're doing today, that they just started doing, is they realize that there are some Type 86 entries that are listing as the consignee an address that's non-existent. And he said, we looked at the address, we went into Google search and we plugged in the address and it was, 123 Main Street, Anytown, USA. And there is no Main Street in Anytown, USA. So the addresses were just, they weren't addresses. And so that shows you that how aggressive customs is being in 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 trying to stop illicit trade, trying to stop the Type 86 entry and the other de minimis entry types from being used to import products that are not allowed to be imported. So that was a new one that we just heard about, and I'm going back and talking to our technical teams and saying that we need to start looking at the addresses to make sure that they're real addresses, and if they're not, we need to block them. Anyways, that the last one that we have here on the list before we go in and start touching on some of the questions that you have is intellectual property rights. So again, it's also against the rules, against the law to import products that are counterfeit products. And customs has a website where you can look up to see if a product is registered with their trademark, and that trademark is recorded with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And any products that have these counterfeit trademarks or copyright or patent infringements, again, these are prohibited from being imported. So again, it's a matter that's important for the companies that are making use of the Type 86 and the other programs to import low value de minimis shipments, that they are looking to ensure that the products that they import are not contraband. Any other last thoughts on that, Marcus?
No, I don't think so. The only one I'd add for the counterfeit one is just to make sure, like a lot of these, importers, if you're importing things that are licensed or trademarked, you may already have a licensing agreement in place with the owner of that trademark. What I just recommend is just make sure that's accessible to you, the trade compliance managers, just so that it's also closer to your broker. The last thing you want to do is try to sift through some warehouse where, yes, we had this deal signed with, some company some years ago, and now I have to dig it up and find it when I'm under the gun. We just recommend having that much, ready to go on hand in case there is any potential question at the time of entry. Yeah.
Wonderful. So let's start touching on some of the questions that are here. I'm sorry. Go ahead. We've got one more. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I want to get to the Q&A too. I've been looking through it. There's some good ones, but I just thought I'd provide a little bit of kind of practical advice. Like Tom's running. Okay, how do I set up my program? But okay, what does it actually look like when things start moving? When I'm starting to actually ship packages and I'm getting orders? How does this? What are some good ideas or best practices? Well, the first one I'd say is early consolidation for intact cargo. Although you can ship by several different modes of transport into the U.S. for de minimis, air is by far probably the most common because it's usually the fastest, right? That's typically why we want that. So what I'd recommend is try to ship intact pallets. Loose cargo is problematic for many reasons. One, you could just lose the shipment that your customer is expecting. But second of all, it makes it also a little bit easier to kind of keep track of, okay, which pallets did or didn't board a plane. Where did I actually get this, is my merchandise ready to go, which then allows it to be easier to create your Type 86 manifest template that you provide to your broker. It also provides a little bit extra window of like dangerous goods screening if those pallets can be shipped intact and identified earlier on in the process. Speaking of pallets, what I think is very helpful, and what I think about kind of at the beginning of the process, how you can facilitate a smooth end to the process, is just having a pallet listing. It's recommended that you should be able to identify, okay, if I'm shipping 3 pallets, 500 packages on each one, and customs wants to see package 786 for an intensive exam, for instance. Can you tell customs which pallet to go to? Can you tell your CFS operator, okay, I need you to go to pallet 1 and pull out this specific parcel? Having this information about how to identify which parcels are on hold or not will help prevent misdeliveries and make any exams or reviews go faster between you and your CFS. As you kind of think about this, Tom suggested kind of about how to set up a program here. And there's really just kind of 3 broad buckets, which probably is not too different if you're a commercial importer that's been handling this before. One is just classification, right? It has to be complete, has to be 10 digits, has to be specific to the United States. When a lot of different sellers from overseas want to provide stuff to the US market, they're really eager, they want to be quick, they want to show that they're proactive, but sometimes that eagerness to help out can sometimes put you in a bad spot. Maybe it appears in the sense of a bad address, perhaps, but maybe it's also just a misclassification. So making sure that you have a robust product library, knowing what products should have what classification, will just make that easier, especially with the requirement now that we have to file the entry prior to arrival. This makes it quite a bit easier to make sure you have it in hand. The last thing you want to do is have an 11-hour flight from Asia ticking, trying to work with your broker at 3 a.m. to identify a classification question. It's best served if you can do this in advance. Same things go for PGA due diligence or AD/CVD due diligence as well. Making sure you're familiar with those requirements for the products. If you're not sure, you can reach out to Flexport, for our advisory team for maybe a little bit more advice on classification, PGA, or AD/CVD questions. They can help prepare you so that by the time the cargo arrives, the broker could make an entry on time, and that you're not going to have holds, exams, or at worst seize cargo based on missing or incomplete data. This other one here is technically not required, and the small font there, it is optional, but is something I'd want to see, is the manufacturer reporting. Today, right, the legal note, we said this is the facts based on today. You aren't required to report the manufacturer for products at the time of importation. That said, UFLPA is very important to customs. They're looking at it quite a bit more in detail. This is maybe something that they may look to expand to in the not too distant future. And being able to identify, okay, where my manufacturer is located, do I have accurate MID codes? Customs are putting a lot of energy into this. They're looking to revamp it with the GBI initiative, the Global Business Identifier. Manufacturers are important to customs because this is how they are best served to try to enforce these forced labor rules as well. So it's optional, but I would recommend it to all our suppliers. Are having this conversation now with identifying, okay, where is my stuff made? Where is it coming from any of these suspect regions? Do I need to have a little bit more of a tighter grip on my suppliers? And then the final one here is just identify your CFS and exam procedures. Exams, I think, overall are still fairly low as it comes to the Type 86 filing, especially if you consider just 3.5 to 4 million parcels per day as a percentage. We're probably talking about a very small amount that customs can realistically look at, but they do happen. You should expect it. If it hasn't happened yet, just wait till your next shipment. It's bound to happen sooner or later. The last thing you want to do is just be unprepared. Make sure the CFS you're working with knows what to do when those cargoes arrive. Make sure your CFS knows how to segregate cargo that's maybe still on hold or at least not released because something did happen or didn't happen or was over the value threshold or it has anti-dumping merchandise or something. Make sure your CFS and supply chain partners know what to do in the case of a parcel that's being held for exam, held for further review, or just simply isn't released by the time it arrives to the United States. Yeah, so those are kind of some very practical recommendations here, I think, that are just good practices to bring into any kind of successful program, in addition to the big, broad questions that Tom talked about as you strategize about how to make this work for your business and realize the duty savings opportunity that comes with the Type 86. But I think with that, let's go to our Q&A here. Sure. I think we have some good questions.
And really remember everything that Marcus said, I agree with, but also remember that things are changing. And so we're going to see new requirements, see new Marcus mentioned exam rates are not that high. Customs is getting more resources, so we're going to be seeing more exams. Customs is opening up more exam stations around the country, so we're going to be seeing more exams. Don't expect the same patterns that we're seeing today to continue. I'm looking at the first question here is what specific indicators or patterns can be used to identify potential shipment splitting practices, and how can these be monitored effectively? That's a really challenging question, and it really depends on where you are in the supply chain. So let's start at the beginning. If you're, say, an e-commerce platform that is selling products to customers, you need to be monitoring your customers' buying habits. If they're buying more than $800 on one day, not in one session, but in one day, then you need to be flagging those as potentially going to be over the value limit, and you need to be looking at that. Now, the next step in the chain is the carrier. So the carrier needs to be looking at the manifest and the values on the manifest, and they need to be looking to see, is the same person listed on the manifest multiple times, and are the totals of the shipments more than $800? And then we have the broker that's filing the Type 86 entry, and they have to do the same thing again, but they're looking at the data a little bit differently because they have different data. And it may be that John Doe bought one purchase from one company and then bought a second purchase from another company, and they're both imported on the same day. And it may be that the only time that comes together is at the broker that happens to be the same. And then the next one is customs. And so customs is also starting to look at this to see, because they've got the biggest picture. They're able to stop or to see all of them, and they're working on the technology to find that. Any other thoughts, Marcus?
Yeah, I think just kind of some basic stuff on that same point is just name and address, right? Are we seeing name and address and just like what's the sum of the value, right? You can't have, splitting shipment. I know there's certainly customs has definitely tried to identify those and said, okay, you're splitting up a shipment into multiple pieces all under $800. Customs has said that's not allowed. So I think it's just kind of noticing, okay, what kind of patterns are we seeing? A lot of shipments for $750 all going to Jane Smith, at the same address. Okay, maybe there is some improper activity there, but it's a little bit tricky to kind of sort out in any individual piece of the puzzle. But we all have to do our part. We all have a requirement to do so, and that goes from importers up the chain, suppliers to the customs broker, and ultimately CBP. But we're there to help CBP enforce their rules and facilitate importers while they comply with those rules.
Right. Let's see, the next question, per person per day means per tax ID of a company, correct? Marcus, you want to?
Yeah, the per person per day, it's a good question. And, it's really kind of a funny part of like, why does Type 86 exist at all in some way? And like, how can that even be allowed? And there was a ruling some years ago about foreign trade zones and why maybe they can or cannot, and specifically why they cannot be, facilitate Type 86 types of entries. And it has to do with the difference between a consignee and an ultimate consignee. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a tax ID to Benjamin's question here. It can just be based on the person and the address. And, you're not reporting the social security number for Jane Smith on the entry or on those forms. You are providing her name and address. And so that's really how this is identified. It's based on the ultimate consignee. I know we probably said importer a few times here, and sorry to muddy the waters between importer and importer of record, but when it comes to Type 86, they customs rules about this come down to what is the ultimate consignee, who is the ultimate recipient of this. And that could indeed be a company. Like it certainly could be a firm that's reporting this, but right, the question is you probably can't have, you're still maxed out at $800 for that one company as well. So making sure your ultimate consignee is identified and that they are the ones that are following that $800 limit.
And one thing to understand is that, remember the de minimis provision, Section 321? It's Section 321 of the Tariff Act of 1930. So this is a law that's been around for like close to 100 years now that we're basically working with. And so that's why some of these concepts are a little bit odd or a little bit vague, is because we're dealing with an old law that's been resurrected and is being used today. So let me go to the next question. How can importers ensure couriers, when conducting manifest clearances, make PGA declarations? Well, that's the first part of the question. First thing is that a PGA declaration may not be made on a manifest clearance. So if it's a truck shipment that is going to be cleared off the manifest, that has to be filed as a Type 86. And I think the important part of the question is, how can importers ensure? And it's important to understand it. Remember, it's the importer's responsibility. It's the platform's responsibility to ensure compliance. Um, so the question goes on to ask about, if low value shipments are delivered via manifest clearance, what's the risk of accepting the shipment if importers cannot confirm PGA declarations? Again, remember, we have this concept of reasonable care. So it's the importer's responsibility to exercise reasonable care. So there could be consequences. Any other thoughts, Marcus?
Nope. I think yeah.
Okay. The next one, if we don't have PGA requirements, do we stay away from Type 86 and focus on old Section 321? My thought on that is no, because of a procedural process. But go ahead, Marcus. You want to?
Well, I think you kind of actually alluded to it as well. Like, do we stay away from Type 86? And well, it's a lot easier for brokers to kind of be participating in Type 86, because while it was designed originally to be able to submit PGA information, there's no need to necessarily submit PGA information alongside it. And that's partly why we saw this massive proliferation, really, when it came to Type 86, is that brokers can now submit this, and it was intended for PGA use, but it hasn't been limited to just PGA use. So that is possible here, but depending on the broker, that may be like how they file these de minimis entries, and it can be quite a bit simpler for them as well.
Let me actually add to that a little bit, and that is that the old Section 321 process that the person was asking about, it's still available, but it's a manual process. So, and it also varies from port to port. So with some ports, you print out the bill of lading, or you print out a listing of bills of lading, and you courier it, messenger it to the port. And then the port has to look at the data, and somebody at the port has to make a decision and release each individual shipment. It takes days to do that. Now, some ports allow you to email a spreadsheet. Some ports have a specific format that they want you to use. So one of the problems is that it's a different process in different ports. So if you want to have a national process that's consistent, you're not going to be able to get that with the old Section 321 clearance. And it generally adds 3 or 4 days to the process.
Yeah, that's good.
Let's see. Next one. How can brokers acting as importer of record maintain proper documentation to prove compliance with both Type 86 and de minimis requirements, especially during audits or inspections? Marcus, as a broker acting as, in some cases, as the importer of record, you want to touch on that question?
Yeah, so I think at least part of it is we have to maintain the documentation that we get from CBP, for CBP, from the importer or our clients that are actually shipping this cargo here. So when they provide this Type 86, we need to make sure we know, okay, what were the instructions about how to prepare this documentation? What kinds of PGA data are they providing? How are they providing it to us? When can we disclaim? All of those sorts of different pieces of information are things that we do need to make sure that we do have on hand as part of being a broker. And whether or not we act as an IOR or not, that documentation still needs to be retained as well. So I think for a broker maintaining it, there's still the record keeping requirements. This is still considered customs business to do de minimis clearances. So all those records do need to be maintained, and just making sure there's good documentation procedures for providing this information to customs in case of an audit or inspection.
And with that, Marcus, I think we're out of actually a little bit over time. So I'll say that concludes this webinar. Thank you very much for the great questions. If you would like to get in contact with Flexport for Flexport Customs, please email us either at advisory@flexport.com, advisory@flexport.com, if you'd like information on how to set up a program or questions, or you can email us at 321customs@flexport.com. And thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.